Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the previous video, we went ahead and began the job of plumbing the Supra. And we're going to keep working on that a bit more today. Now, off camera throughout the week, I did some additional plumbing and figured out solutions to a few problems as a bit of catharsis, but I guess I'll go through that with you now, or at least what we can see at this current point in time. So, if you remember, we needed to figure out how to get our first scavenge port off of the dry sump pan to the pump. And as you can see, there is a line in place now. So I went ahead and I got the forged 90 that I was talking about. That arrived, and I used a regular 90-degree number 12 hose end here, and I was able to get a line to bend to connect those two, and it's starting to oval a little bit, but it is definitely not kinked. So with the hand that I'm dealt with this spacing, and I was my own dealer for that hand, we are able to connect these two and that will work fine. So I need to remake these two center scavenge ports, which I have two 120-degree fittings here, which will direct the lines over top of the dry sump feed. They will snake around the backside of the pump and make their way. This is just the fitting I had here to mock up our path from the actual scavenge ports on the pan. But we'll go from those two center ports on the pump itself to these two on the pan, and all will be well there. So I guess we can build those lines today, provided that I have enough number 12 hose. Fingers crossed that I do. But beyond that, we need to make the oil return line as well. So this is a nice, it's an old no corners cut fabrication NCC fab, which if you guys have ever seen the intercoolers and radiators and aluminum work, and I guess work in general that they do, it is absolutely top notch. Those guys do a phenomenal job. And I got this from them. I believe they have discontinued their turbo drain mounts like this, but I was able to get one of the last ones that they had, and it's set up for a number 10 ORB, but I have a number 10 ORB to number 12 tight radius adapter deal that's sitting over there somewhere, as that will be the first line that we work on today. So beyond that, we have a few parts from Jegs. I have the number 12 plug for the fuel pressure regulator. It's open port or extra port. I have these two number 12 ORB fittings that will go in the oil filter adapter when it arrives. I went ahead and I ordered a nice Peterson oil filter adapter. They have a small and a large option. I opted for the small one, as that's the thread on the pump adapter corresponds to the thread that a normal 2JZ oil pump would use. Now the lines, I guess the adapters, they're designed similarly between the small and the large option. So should I decide that I need a larger oil filter, it should be a very easy swap from the small to the large, with the exception of maybe having to build a new bracket, which is not the end of the world. So I have those parts. I have some heat sleeving for the oil return, as it will end up going fairly close to the turbine housing, and it likely would be fine without the sleeving, but just to do my bit of due diligence and to make sure, I guess ensure, that it is shielded from the hot turbine housing as best it can be, I will put that heat sleeving over top of it and all will be well there. Now I have some of the other lines made, which we won't be able to see until the car comes down. We'll do that in a little bit, but I have a semi-mistake, semi-tech tip for you guys that I would like to show before we dive into building the oil return line, the extra dry sump lines, or the, not extra, but the outstanding dry sump lines. And that is this right here. Now this is the transmission cooler that I built for the car a few videos ago, and we have our number 12 ORB to number 6 AN adapters. This one threads perfectly fine, but why is there not one in this port, you may ask? And if you can see the lack of threads on pretty much the first two threads there, that is the problem. So I'm not sure if you will be able to see or not. Probably not, with GoPro not being the best for close-ups. But what happened is we either smeared or pulled a thread as I was tightening this down, and it felt absolutely fine going down into this bung until we got just about to the point where the O-ring seats, and that is where the nightmare began. So it was close enough, and it really didn't feel bad enough, as you'll generally know if you're pulling a thread. And not that I've done that on purpose any times before or not, but it didn't feel right. I went to try to loosen it out, and it stopped. Tightened it back, it stopped, and that's when I went, oh crap. Because if this was stuck in here, I guess the only recourse would be to cut the O-ring off, take the anodizing off that I could, and to weld this adapter fitting to the bung, which would not be the end of the world, but it also is not the way that I wanted this to be designed. So I went ahead, and if you remember me talking about waiting on the number 16, or the tap for the number 16 ORB bungs and the radiator, that came in. But I've had pretty good luck with number 12 bungs, except for this. So I went ahead, went back to eBay, ordered another tap that will be in on Monday. We're filming on Sunday. That should be in here. It should arrive tomorrow. Then I can go ahead, clean those threads up. I can take this fitting and trim it to essentially where my thumbnail is there, take those first couple of threads off, and it will work just as well, since the rest of the threads are good to go and the O-ring is still good. It's just that bottom of it that is the problem child. So at this point, for any ORB bungs, I will recommend doing your due diligence, buying a tap. They really aren't that expensive, and chasing the threads on ORB bungs. Now, my buddy Gabe at Rampage Fabrication, he's had good luck with putting some anti-seize on these and tightening them down that way. That's also a very good option. So either anti-seize, use a tap to chase, or do some combination of the both of those things, and you will save yourself from having a situation like this. Thankfully I was able to get it out, but it very easily could have gone the other direction. So with that being said, we can go ahead now. I will get this heat sleeving out of its bag here. I can figure out the length for the oil return line. We can get that made, get it put in place, and we can move on to the dry sump lines and get the rest of the plumbing that I can finish right now wrapped up. And there we have the oil return line. So you can see how close it comes to the turbine housing and why I wanted to put that heat shield on it, or the heat sleeving, but hopefully this will keep that line alive. And I may end up getting some metal zip ties to just tie this sleeving in place a little bit better, as it is a little bit sloppy the way it is now. And a plastic zip tie that close to a turbine housing, all you're going to do there is melt plastic. So that line is done, and you guys may be asking yourself, because a traditional gravity drain for an oil return, you don't want it to go uphill, which this one appears to, at least from my vantage point, ever so slightly. However, with this guy right here being the dry sump pump, that will actually work to put the crankcase under a vacuum. So what I mean by that is it's working to suck oil out of the turbo, out of the bottom end, once it's gone through all the oil passages, through the block, through the crank, what have you. And that is working to, mechanically siphon the oil out of the oil pan here. And we obviously don't have a sump on this pan. This is our sump and our oil reservoir now. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better idea of the way a dry sump system works. And I know I did have a lot of luck with the Yamaha, and this thing is kind of sad in a little bit of a state of not necessarily disrepair, but disfabricating the rest of the new turbo system, but we'll get to that very shortly. Just didn't have time to today. But that aside, the point that I'm getting at is the oil return on this thing. This manifold sits a little bit higher than the initial manifold that I built, but the oil return on this setup, it snaked down and actually came back up, kind of a nice little serpent wave going into the oil return on the back of the stator cover. And I never had issues with smoking or oil return being a problem because these are factory dry sump systems as well. So same principle. The pump is working to suck oil out of the engine once it's gone through where it needs to. And that's the only thing that I can attribute to this thing not smoking and not having any issue. So I'm hoping that the same principle in the same situation applies to this thing. If not, I have all this real estate right here where I could purchase a scavenge pump, put an auxiliary pump on the oil return, and force the oil from the turbo back to the pan, let the dry sump pump do its thing, suck that oil back out, put it back into the tank, and so on and so forth. But that is a bridge to cross at a later date. Right now we have the line in place, and this will work perfectly fine for the time being. So we have our 90-degree tight radius forged deal here. Comes along a section of straight to a 60-degree fitting, ORB fitting going into the pan, so on and so forth. You guys know the way I like to do things at this point, and we are good to go with that line. So I can move on now and knock these two remaining dry sump scavenge lines out. I'll likely do that off camera, as I'm sure you guys don't want to watch me build any more hand lines at this point. It's kind of boring, but I'll get those two lines knocked out and we will reconvene shortly once they're back installed in the car. There we have our two new dry sump scavenge lines that actually clear everything and go to their respective scavenge ports on the pan. There we go. All is well, and very happy with it. So I like the look of it a little bit more, and obviously it frees up some space here. Everything isn't quite as congested, and it's just an overall better system. So that takes care of what we needed to look at on the bottom of the car. Let me go ahead, I'll lower the car down, and I can take you guys through what I did on the top side in regards to plumbing and a couple of new components, or I guess one new component that is a necessity for putting the rest of the oiling system together. On the top side, we have all of the coolant lines completed. So we have this one goes from the fill pot, snakes over to the top side of the radiator. It might be a little bit difficult to see some of these, but we have the feed into the block right here where my finger's touching. That feeds to the outlet of our pump. Oh, don't want to knock my part down. That is, let me grab a pointer. There we go. It is this guy right here, if you can see it. And then we have on the bottom side of the radiator, which it still needs to be tied up. It's a little bit long and wonky at this point, but we have the bottom side of the radiator that snakes back to the inlet of the water pump, which we can't see from this angle here. So all of that is completed. And in regards to the cooling system, the only thing left to do is to put our steam port on the back of the cylinder head, but I have not ordered the pipe section and the AN weld bung that I need to just yet. I'll do that this week sometime. Just was procrastinating ordering it, but get that in and get that squared away. So the part for the oiling system that I needed was this guy right here. and you can see the Moroso part number there. And 2JZ guys, take note if you're ever planning to build your own dry sump system as opposed to buying one of the readily made options. If you're a smart person like I am and like making more work for yourself, then this is a necessity for it. And what this is what they call an oil filter delete. So this threads onto, I guess we can go over to my mock deal here. Now, this part threads into the factory oil filter location on a 2JZ. So it uses I believe it's a 3/4 16 thread that threads into the side of the block. This is also a 3/4 16 thread, and I don't want to put this on the side of this gross engine, but it will thread on something like that, and it allows you to attach a number 12 line directly to it. It's O-ring sealed and all of that for good retention and what have you, but that will thread onto the side of the block. And then the dry sump pump, out of the top of it, will have a line that snakes around somewhere back in this area, wherever I can find space for it. So where the oil filter will be located, in the oil filter housing that I was talking about earlier. And then I simply run a line from the top of the pump to the oil filter housing, from the oil filter housing over to this guy right here. So you would not believe how difficult it was to source that part, just figuring out what vernacular they use to describe that part. I was searching for dry sump oil feed adapter, pretty much everything but oil filter delete. And oftentimes when you're looking up parts like that or trying to determine the verbiage for it, the simplest option is usually what they have called it. So I never would have thought to call it an oil filter delete. That is on me for trying to overthink something like that, but that is in fact what it is. You saw the part number. If you need one, I think I got that one from Summit. It was less than $100 shipped to my door here, and definitely a necessity to get oil from the pump into the engine, as I don't think Bluetooth has gotten to the point yet where it can transmit fluids. So that is wrapped up. We have our oil drain wrapped up. We have the dry sump scavenge lines completed, all the fuel lines that you guys saw in the last video, the coolant lines, what have you. So we are damn near plumbed with this car at this point. And it wasn't AN lines, I don't think they're really that much work. It's just time consuming and can be a little bit cumbersome to mark lines appropriately, get your lengths right, what have you. But all that comes with experience, and there's really no way to learn how to do these other than to dive in head first, make your mistakes, learn, so on and so forth, as is the way with many things building a car. So there will still be one additional fabrication project to wrap up the AN lines, and I'll need to order more lines, more hose ends, so on and so forth. But I knew that was going to be the case, and I specifically left these ones out as I wanted to figure out exactly how I wanted to do this portion, and that is the breather system. So even though this is a dry sump engine that will be under vacuum, where the pump is sucking all of the used oil, for lack of a better description, and putting it back into the tank, we still have these two nipples on the top of the tank, as well as these two on the valve covers. And I'm going to build what they call a burn down tank. And essentially what that is just a really large catch can that will catch a large oil volume should you have an engine failure. And it's very important for cars that see a lot of boost and a lot of cylinder pressure, a lot of heat, that have a high potential to blow up, for lack of a better description. You need a catch can with a significant enough volume that it won't immediately overfill should something like that happen, and put fluid down, oil, coolant, or oil I guess in this case, down in front of something like this car where the drive tires or the rear tires. You don't exactly want to go over an oil slick at 180 miles an hour. So this burn down tank, it will be located in the rear of the car, which if we walk around here, and let me pop the hatch. Back here I have all kinds of room to put a burn down tank. And now I have my sheet metal that covers up the gigantic hole that I cut in the back of the car. Probably one of the smartest things that I've done is cut up a car that is appreciating in value the way that these things are, but whatever. I've learned a bunch along the way. It's been a good experience, and you can't win them all, but hindsight's 20/20. But the burn down tank, I'm thinking, will be located in one of these two corners back here, and it'll just be a large catch can that will have a exhaust stack or an outlet stack that will come somewhere up to the top of the hatch. I'll more than likely cut a hole in the hatch somewhere wherever the tube lines up. It'll have that little stack here. And if you guys have paid attention to World Cup, or I guess a good example is my buddy Cooper Bogetti's car. If you ever see when he's on the trans brake on the line, and you'll see a plume of steam or smoke or whatever coming out of the back of his car, if you ever wondered what that is the burn down tank. So it's just taking any waste gases, any waste fluids, what have you, out of the engine and putting them in a tank mounted as rearward in the car as it can be to keep from putting that fluid down on your drive tires and causing you to have probably not a very great day. But we need to build that, get materials, dimension, get materials, build it. That won't be a job for today, as I'm pretty much ran out of time at this point here today. But that'll be a job for a later date, and we'll have a video on that when the time comes. There is one last thing that I want to do today, and that is to pull the balancer off. Now, I've talked to my friend Gabe over at Titan, and we've pretty much determined that this Titan V2 balancer, by the time that I put the dry sump drive off of the front of it, I will not have enough space to make everything fit with the fan and the clearances that I am allotted, or that I have allotted myself, between the damper and the fan and the radiator. So I am going to swap this V2 damper out for one of their original V1 ATI dampers. That is a little bit lower profile. It sits back farther that way, and that will give me a bit more clearance for the dry sump drive and to fit a belt and everything else in there. So I'll go ahead, get the tools together to pull that off. We'll get that yanked off, and then whenever I can send it back, I'll do that, get a V1 in, install it, and then we will be as golden as we can be on that front. So let me get some tools, we'll get that pulled off, and we will go from there. Well, got the first part of the damper off, got all of the Torx bolts loosened up, got the front section off. However, I forgot that the serpentine drive is stuck on the back side of the hub, and I'm not 100% sure the hubs are the same between the V1 and V2 dampers. So to get the hub off, need to pull the radiator, the intercooler, so on and so forth, and I already have a couple of battle scars from today, so I'm going to leave that for a later date. So I really don't feel like pulling all of those parts out right now. I'm not doing it right now, but I'll get that pulled off sometime during the week, get it shipped off, get the V1 on the way, which is kind of unfortunate because I had a Titan V1 before. I sold it off without really thinking about the implications in terms of the dry sump drive on this thing. But the time has came, the time has arrived now where I need to suck it up and get the same part that I already had. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I'll get it in, get that sorted out, and we'll have the drive for the dry sump figured out at that point, and that'll be another huge step forward. Seems small, but huge step forward to get us closer to finishing this thing. So what's left at this point, you may ask? Well, we have to mount the boost control solenoids, plumb the boost control stuff. I need to buy a, I think that's pronounced Viair or Viair, one of the little portable air compressors that you see used pretty commonly in off-roading for like an air locking diff or something along those lines. That's what will provide the compressed air, or compressed gas rather, for the two TurboSmart ProGate 50 compressed gas wastegates. So that will take care of that. To figure out the boost control solenoid stuff, that's not a big deal. I need to fasten the master down, build brake lines for it, bench bleed it, do all of that, get the brake system working again. I need to, what else is there? There's the wiring portion, but as I said in one of the previous videos, I have a couple of very, very good buddies that are taking care of that for me. So Sean, Bob, you guys are awesome. Thank you again. I need to get a radiator cap, and I'm just looking around. There really isn't that much left to do, but this is the difficult part when it's very easy to overlook things, and I'm trying my best not to do that. So when it comes time when we're actually trying to fire this thing, there are no surprises, or as few surprises as I can possibly have. So I need to also finish the dash up. I know I showed working on that a little bit, but it still needs all of its finish work and everything. It sits in the place that I want it to. I need to put a couple more of those quick latches in that they will fasten to this section of the cage architecture right there, but that is, again, not a project for today. I need to fix a threaded hole on the back of the car where the subframe connects to the body itself, or to the chassis itself. So, you know, a moderately crucial part of keeping this thing together, and, you know, like driving straight and all of that. But I need to drop the subframe down to do that. Just been putting it off. These things are not difficult to drop the subframes on, but it is essentially an entire day's project to do so, and I just haven't taken a day to do it yet. But beyond all of that, I mean, we're really almost there. Yeah, I think that's pretty close, minus glass and other small, I mean, relatively small items like that just takes a glass guy a day to come in and stab a new windshield in this thing. But we're really quite close. Getting much more excited about this thing as its completion draws closer. And there's always a little bit of melancholy associated with that as well. As, I mean, at this point in time, the last time this car ran and raced and all of that is towards the end of 2016. So it's been down now, I'd have to look at the dates, but I believe it's been down for over 5 years at this point in time. And it's the only things that remain from back then are the bottom end, so the rotating assembly in the block, the chassis obviously, and the rear differential. Everything else is all brand new. The cylinder head, oiling system, turbo system, intake manifold, oh, the fuel cell or the fuel tank, the exhaust, the everything. So it shouldn't have taken this long, but life has a way of getting in the way and taking you along different trajectories as you are trying to put something massive like this together. But will be obviously a happy day, but a little bit of a sad one when it finally fires up and when it's finally completed, or I guess completed, quote quote. But it needs to get to that point, and it would all be for naught if I don't get to hear it run. So I guess that's enough of my rambling. I could go on all day like this, but I will spare you guys the verbal diarrhea. So with all that in mind, and no, didn't get a whole lot done today, but a few crucial parts, and appreciate you guys sticking around and watching and subscribing, supporting, and doing all the things that you guys do to keep me motivated and to keep this channel and to keep me going with all of these weird projects and my weird self on this YouTube channel. So with all that being said, that'll be the end of this episode. And as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next episode.